Crusan with us to facilitate our online discussion on L2 classroom writing assessment. Deborah is an expert in this area, and her book, Assessment in the Second Language Writing Classroom, published by University of Michigan Press, is a great resource if you're looking for information about classroom writing assessment. Today, Deborah will facilitate our discussion. And so this is a discussion rather than a one-sided webinar, so we'd like to encourage people to participate and speak up and ask questions. Whenever you have them, you can ask them orally. You can type them in the chat box also to ask questions. So I think we're ready to go. Deborah, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Wonderful.
Great.
Okay, hi everyone. As Ryan said, my name is Deborah Crusan. I'm a professor at Wright State University in Dayton, Ohio. And my area of expertise, of course, is second language writing assessment. But to know about that, you have to know about L1 writing assessment and L1 composition or rhetoric and L2 composition and rhetoric. So I've spent a long time studying all those things. I thought today I don't know whether the second slide of this webinar PowerPoint will show up. Can we get that, Ryan? Oh, there it is. Okay, so these are the things that I usually do. I talk to people about the kinds of experiences they have, and I'd like to talk about the first one first. What has been your best experience with the assessment of writing as a teacher and as a student? And you can just chime in whenever.
So I guess I'll start. I'm Greer Murphy. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
And I can't, I guess, think of a specific instance, but in general, I find that as a teacher, writing assessment goes better, I guess is more successful, when I'm able to loop in one-on-one student conferencing. And whether that would be to supplement written comments that I've left on a paper or kind of conducted earlier at more of the brainstorming stage of the writing process. I find it very difficult for me to do at least formative assessment, right? That in contrast to summative work, if I don't have that one-on-one conversation with students.
I agree. That's been my experience as well.
Mine has been equally successful when I have conferences with my students. I think that, I guess I should basically tell you my philosophy about writing assessment, and that is that writing assignments and writing assessment are the same thing. They're inextricably tied together. You cannot separate them. At every turn, no matter whether it's at the beginning or the end of an assignment or in the middle, you are assessing something about your students' writing. So Greer was on the money with that, because she, you know, and especially when you can sit down and talk to your students face to face. If they didn't understand one of your comments, then they can ask you. And then, of course, I think that that should be one of the criteria for sitting down with the teacher, is that the student should control and ask questions. Anyone else? Best experience with writing assessment? So someone says that they're in an office and can't talk, but that's pretty awesome. Being objective, because once the student asserts himself in the writing, I can hear the voice. It feels so special that I find it hard to be critical. Wow. That's very interesting.
I remember my best experience as a student was when I was writing a paper for my English professor, and it was based on a more Asian model, and I said, do you think I need an introduction and a conclusion? Because the style was very different. And he looked at me and he said, do you think you need one? And I said, no. And he said, then don't write one. And I felt very empowered by that.
That's pretty empowering. I like that. And of course, then if he told you that, of course, then he or she would not be assessing you on that, right?
Exactly.
Right. Okay, how about worst or most difficult experiences with the assessment of writing?
I have one for that too. I was in France writing in French for an instructor, and he completely dismissed all of my ideas. He had said a question. He'd said it was very important to analyze the question very closely and then to base your answer on that close assessment. And I started off writing very sort of run-of-the-mill kinds of composition, and then I looked at the question more closely, and suddenly I thought of all these other ways of approaching it. So I wrote mine on this close assessment, which he then dismissed out of hand and said I should have written the very basic things that I had originally started with, and I felt extremely, and no matter what I said, I got the same answer. That left me feeling extremely bad.
Yes, which that happened to me so many times as a student that as a teacher I'm so careful, I hope so anyway, that not to do that to my students, right? And I think that's why I ask these questions, because when I teach teachers to teach, I always say to them, put yourself in your students' shoes. How did you feel when this happened? How did you feel when that happened? So, you know, to have these kinds of experiences where we feel marginalized by the teacher, even though that teacher probably didn't tell you, Karen, very much criteria. They didn't really lead you in, and so that you had knowledge about how you were going to be assessed. It was probably very vague and ambiguous. So from that, we should learn that we shouldn't be vague and ambiguous when we're trying to get our students to write an assignment.
I think it's also a point in there is that he stated that we should do one thing, but when I followed up on that, he didn't like it. So there was a conflict between what he told us to do and what he then valued in the assessment.
Right. And that's a perfect example of when I say every time I present or write about writing assessment is that the person who is doing the assessing needs to be just as accountable to his or her students as he or she believes students should be accountable to the teacher. So, you know, when you tell someone this is what you want them to do, then you have to honor that when they do it. Now, they may not have done it well, so you should have some kind of scoring that differentiates the really good from the not so good, right? So you don't give them as many points on that. They've done it, but they've not done it well. But to not honor what you've said, to me, is unethical assessment in any skill. Anyone else? Difficult experience with another person, Rebecca Lawrence, mentioned that it was frustrating not to know grading criteria. So, you know, and she said at the whim of the teacher, and I know that often we feel that we really are at the whim of the teacher and shouldn't be shouldn't be the way it is. Again, you as a teacher are as accountable to your students as you would have them be accountable to you. So I think that's a really important thing about specific guidelines. Anyone else?
Am I online?
You are. Hello.
Oh, I didn't know if you could hear me. I had one that was the worst at the moment, but it turned out to be the best for me as a teacher.
Oh.
I was taking a graduate class from someone who ended up being the president of TESOL, but he was from a foreign country, and I had always had great assessments on all of my writing, great compliments, and he corrected something, and I just was so irritated with that. This isn't your first language. How can you, you know? And I went and looked at it very carefully and realized he was right, and I have told him. And I have used that so many times to my students to say, I know what it feels like to have somebody go in and you think they don't have the right to tell you that something should be different. Because we have a lot of people who have gone to school in English. Here, I'm at Dixie State University. We have Nigerians, for example, who've gone to school in English, but their English is different and it's non-academic. And you can see in their faces that they're pretty resistant. You know, they'll take the test, answer the questions, and then not apply one thing, have a whole paragraph that's one sentence, because that's the way they've been doing it. And I have to say, I know what it feels like when you don't believe the assessment on your writing, but you have to trust me. And it takes a while to earn that trust where they can say, all right, I maybe don't buy into everything you're telling me, but I'm going to give it a try.
Right.
And that's hard. That's hard. It takes some of them longer than others.
Yes. Even though, yeah, you're the teacher, and
exactly.
That's a very interesting dynamic, though.
Yeah, they're very respectful. It's not that. It's just that when it comes time to apply it to their own writing, they feel the old ways are best, and I understand that. And that's when I tell that story where I had exactly the same experience.
That's great. That's a great story. Use that kind of fodder right in your classroom. Yeah. So let's move on to the next thing about struggles in writing assessment, either as a writer or a writing teacher. Does anyone have struggles that we can talk about?
I have one.
Okay.
One of the things that I find difficult is in terms of giving written feedback on a composition on the paper. And this is why I value the face-to-face conferences, when I teach composition, I tend to teach sort of low intermediate writers. They are writing 5 or more paragraph compositions with more standard introduction and conclusion. But I find it very difficult to explain enough when I have to give written feedback only.
Right. It's I don't think it's the most effective way, and I think it's incredibly time consuming, and then it's also very easy for your students to misunderstand what you wrote unless you write a paper, right?
Yes.
So I think that the conference is a wonderful way, and you can say to them and they can say to you in 15 minutes what it might take you an hour and a half to write. And really, I don't think that's an effective use of time, writing that much on a paper. At least that's the way I feel. Betty, you seem to have something to say about that. Please. Hello?
One thing that's difficult, I'm sorry, I'm jumping in again. The one thing that's difficult about conferences, and I try to build in a certain amount of time in class, is that it's very difficult to have enough time and to match.
Yes.
I'm at a community college,
right,
and my students have jobs and families and
right,
do not necessarily have the ability to come to see me before or after class. And my classes run to 25 students,
yes.
So providing feedback in class is also somewhat limited.
Yes, it is. And that's a good idea to sometimes run your class as a workshop where students are actually working on an assignment in class. And also then you can go around and conference with them. The other thing I've done is 2 or 3 or even 4 times a semester, I cancel class for a whole week. Of course, that would be either 2 classes or 3 classes. And I try to fit everyone in for like 10 minutes. And I give them a very specific thing that they have to come with one burning question to that conference about their writing. And they have to show it to me, right? They have to bring the paper, they have to show me what they're talking about, and then we talk about that. And then I do turn my class into a workshop, and then I do go around and talk to my students about what they're doing at that time. And that's very immediate feedback. And I think helps them to better their paper. Some of them, right? But Karen, and all of you, we're always going to have all these problems with too many students, not enough time. And I think if I know that you can also attest to how many times you've talked to teachers, and those are the two things that we wail about, right? We don't have enough time and we have so many students, especially writing teachers. And then we have, I don't know, 4 classes of 25 sometimes, or 5 classes even. So it's very difficult. You know, teaching writing and assessing writing is not an easy thing to do. So let's go next to the positions on rubrics. I'm always so interested to hear what you think about them, whether you use them or not, and why.
I use a rubric. I taught in the regular composition, the pre-college composition course before before this ESL program opened. So I have a sense of how they were using it, and I adapted ours. I find it's very helpful. Not everybody likes it. Not all of the students utilize it very well, but I have 2. I have one that is strictly grammar, and so I have abbreviations for all of the things I do, so they can see where their greatest weaknesses are.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, because I don't want them thinking about everything. I just tell them, look at your top 3, see what you can do about that. And it gives them a sense of progress over the semester. And then that goes into the grading rubric, which is one part, and I always say, don't forget, grammar is only 20%. That's all it is. Unless it's interfering with comprehension, then it's going to be a problem in other places too, but indirectly. So I find them very helpful because I can go to that to say, this is where the grade came from. This is one of my problems with it, though, that's just come up in the most recent one. I'm, marking, okay, that's a comma splice, that's a comma splice, knowing full well that even the English teachers are probably going to let some of those go, like the comma before because. Some very famous professional writers put a comma before because. It's wrong, and I want to mark it, but I do have to tell them not everybody's going to be so picky about that.
Right.
I've got it on the rubric, so I don't feel like...
You're a rule follower, just like me, Linda.
What?
You're a rule follower, just like I am.
Well, I figure if I have them follow them in my class, when they get to another one that's a little bit looser, they'll be fine, because they're only going to remember, if we're lucky, like 70%.
Right.
Oh, that's if we're very
lucky. That some people actually do think that that's okay, so then they're prepared and they find someone who is okay with it.
That it's not that I was wrong, it's that some people are not hard over.
Exactly. And language changes too, so.
Exactly. I give them the example of that, and I always I recite a little bit of Chaucer and say this is what it was like 800 years ago, and now look at how different we are.
That's a good example.
Yeah.
That's great.
Sorry. Go
ahead, Karen.
I think that also brings up the question of how much and to what extent are we going to include what I call sentence level errors, so editing or grammar, grammar errors. Again, as Linda said, excluding incomprehensibility because of those errors. And for me, it depends on the level of the writer, the degree to which I emphasize grammar in overall assessment. How about other people?
That's something, this is Betty, that's something that I try to leave in the hands of the student by not really putting a lot of emphasis on grammar and a grading rubric, but to allow that to be a part of the rubric where the individual student decides what it is, what other thing they want to be evaluated on, what they really want me to pay attention to in their paper, so that by the end of the semester, it's based on their achievement of an individual goal.
Mm-hmm. I like that.
Yeah, that's sense.
I would say for me it depends not just on the student, but on the type of assignment that I'm giving. So if I have kind of a shorter, maybe a reading summary, depending which classes I teach everything from ESL to basic writing to freshman comp. And so, for example, if it's the basic writing class and we're really trying to get get through to the skill of kind of synthesis and a good solid summary of something that we've read together, but it's not kind of a final paper. It's not them doing something else, something kind of slightly more creative with that reading, then I might incorporate a bit more attention on kind of sentence level stuff on grammar. I typically find that with longer papers, longer compositions, I've gotten away from, or at least I've tried to get away from, it's hard,
Yes.
focusing on that sentence level stuff,
Yes.
and looking kind of at the larger rhetorical considerations,
Right.
Which isn't always what students want, particularly
Of course
students
not.
from certain national origins have come to me and specifically said, well, I want you to correct every grammar mistake that I ever make. And so then you have to negotiate, well, I know you think you want that, but let me tell you why you don't actually, because it won't benefit you for X, Y, Z,
Right.
and so on.
Exactly. Yeah, they think they do until they see the paper that's dripping in blood.
Mm-hmm.
I think often it's enough just to give them that wish for one paragraph, and then when they see what that looks like, they understand that they need to
Yes. What they don't want, right. As far as talking about it, it depends what the student wants and it depends what we're working on. I learned early on from my advisor at Penn State, Karen Johnson. So we would ask her, should we do something? Should we teach grammar in the writing classroom, or should we do XYZ in the classroom? And she would say, it depends. And then she would make us articulate why or why not we thought that this was a good idea, whatever it was. So, I had some preview questions that I'll go through in a minute, but one of the answers to one of them was it depends. It depends on what your students are working on, what their level is, what they're going to do with this. Maybe they're just here learning English, for a month, and then they're going to go back to their home country, or maybe they're actually going to do a degree in an English medium school, university in the United States, in which case that's a very different animal, right? So it all depends on what your students' needs are for all of this. So I think that's like the number one rule of teaching, writing, and writing assessment is, what are my students' needs, and what do they have to learn, and what do they have to be able to do? And from that, then I can fashion a course and assignments that will hopefully get at that exact thing. As most of you probably know, I'm a very big advocate of rubrics. And the reason I am is because I really and truly believe, again, that teachers should be accountable to their students, and that students do better when they know what they have to do. Some people believe that rubrics sort of limit the ability of a teacher to grade a student. I say that if you feel that way about rubrics, then maybe you need to tinker more with your rubric. And I also believe that you should fashion a rubric for every assignment, because I'm sure that all of you are probably stellar writing teachers who write wonderful assignments. And I'm sure that what you ask your students to do in those assignments is different every time. So you should have the rubric that reflects that. Anyone else?
Yeah, that absolutely would. The rubric, it helps me more than it helps the students, I think, because it keeps reminding me what I should be looking at when I see things that are crazy and disturbing and upsetting that I really want to evaluate on, but that was not our agreement, and so I need to let that be.
Right. So you're being ethical, right?
It helps me to be more ethical.
It keeps you in line, Betty, right?
I need that.
Another thing is, I think teaching students how to use rubrics to their advantage is a good thing. I mean, when we do paraphrase and summary exercises on tests, and I point out to them, do you see the rubric at the bottom? This is a reminder to you. I'm going to be looking for citation. There's a C for citation. There's an O for own words. Those are the things I'm looking for. Just look at how I'm going to grade you, because they're not used to looking at things that way, I don't think, and it's kind of a revelation. It feels almost like cheating. And I go, no, it's there for you and for me, because it is. I agree. It's very much for the person teaching to go, what did I not teach well, or what do I need to emphasize more?
It's good feedback for you, too.
Yeah, exactly.
I have a question rather than a comment.
Oh, sorry.
If I can go ahead.
Go ahead, please.
I guess I'd be curious as to what folks think or how folks use holistic versus analytic rubrics in their teaching, whether it kind of varies depending on the scope or type of the assignment, or kind of where people are at with that.
Well, I could speak to that really quickly before someone else jumps in. I believe that an analytic rubric probably is a better instrument for an in-class assignment than a holistic rubric, because a holistic rubric doesn't give your student any kind of feedback. I mean, a 6, what does that mean? And they can read on the rubric what it means, but does that really mean anything to them? So I think it's for me anyway, I get a lot more use out of an analytic rubric. Of course, it's one that I've designed myself. I always use, though, sort of templates like Holly Jacobs et al., that very old analytic rubric from 1981. And also Ferris and Hedgecock have updated that rubric in their book. So it's a really great rubric. Of course, take that as a template and tailor it to the assignment that you're having your students do.
Could you?
I think that pairs really nicely with the idea that second
because I'm not familiar.
Hold on, we have many
with doing that kind of analytic work themselves in a writing workshop, but they can speak holistically. So I let the students in their pairs or groups talk a lot about, the holistic aspects of the strengths and weakness of the paper, but when it comes down to, the really specific skills, then I take responsibility for that.
Okay.
What I had said before was about the grammar one, and that's one rubric, and it goes for, they use the same piece of paper for every assignment in the semester. So I know what I'm going to assign, so it's at the top of the chart, and then the individual specifics, and then for each writing assignment, that goes into one part of it, but then I can be as holistic as I want to in the rest of that, but it is fairly analytic. But I can be a little bit more open about those kinds of things. Did you manage to achieve this goal? And so I think that combination helps me to go through the process, and they look at them differently depending on what they need to know. They look at the one rubric or they look at the other.
I have to say that I've tended to use more what I call guidelines than a rubric in which I assign points. I find it very hard to assign points, and maybe that's my problem that I need to work on. But when every time I hand a paper back, I also hand it back. I write my comments all over the paper, and then I staple to the top a priority list of what the student should work on first, second, in terms of what's most important to improve their paper to get it to, the highest level possible. This also works if they go down to the language lab for assistance with their writing. That the facilitators there have something also to go on.
Yeah, the writing centers are very helpful in general, and the more help we can give them, the better.
Yes. Yes. Karen, I'm looking for the citation for the article, but I can't seem to find a paper with it. If I can find the citation, I will send it to you afterwards. I'll keep looking.
That's fine.
It's Holly Jacobs et al. It's 1981, but it's also there's another analytic rubric in Ferris and Hedgecock, which is wonderful, and you could take that and sort of tailor it to your students' assignments.
I'm sorry, what Hedgecock?
Ferris and Hedgecock.
Oh, Dana Ferris?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes, I can, I mean, I will send you the citations as soon as I can find them.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, does anyone else have anything about rubrics?
I
Bad,
have something to share.
please.
As a teacher, I can use Analytic Rubric to give our students more specific feedback. As even the student who we need for a language proficiency, sometimes they come back, you know, challenging us, asking what is wrong with my paper? Why do I get, you know, the score we have? So then we can tell them what is wrong with their, you know, writing. And as an administrator in our program, the analytic rubric can also help us to help the teacher in our rater training sessions when there are a lot of discrepancies, when the teachers come up with different scores all over. Then we all sit down and see, let's just look at each of the criteria, and it helps us. And for me as a teacher, and even for us in the program, for me as an administrator.
I agree with you. Oh, someone found it. Thanks, Ryan. Hold on. Yes. There's the Ferris and Hedgecock.
Okay, I have to go back.
You all see that? And here is the Holly Jacobs et al. 1981 Analytic Rubric. Either of those are really, really good templates for an analytic rubric. And again, I think that a holistic rubric is better suited for quick and dirty kinds of assessment, like placement, you know. So, so I thought we'd quickly go over experiences you've had with devising instructions, devising prompts, devising scoring rubrics, and rater training, because some of you probably head your programs and worry about rising students as well as placing students. Anybody?
I'll mention something that's not a personal experience, but I was at Georgia TESOL last month, and there was some research that several people had done, and they had started off looking at, and this ties into what somebody else said just a few minutes ago. They started out looking at whether students interpreted rubrics in the same way as raters, and then they discovered that raters were not interpreting the rubrics in the same way, even when raters gave the same final grade to a particular composition. Right. They graded different sections of that composition differently using the rubric. So right. I haven't dealt with that myself, but I can see if you're trying to, you know, in trying to work with consistency, which is a problem. Yes. In our program, is trying to have consistency across the board in a particular level and a particular skill. But it's hard to figure out when we depend so much on part-time instructors just how to enable that.
Right. That's and in that single statement, Karen, you have hit upon all the problems with teaching, right? It's so sad. I wish we could go on and on about all that. And I wish we could solve those problems. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Someone wrote, it might have been you, Karen, who wrote the Georgia TESOL. I got a sort of pre-questions about Georgia TESOL, and I'm sort of drawn to Lee and Lindsay's article in the October issue of Assessing Writing that I actually guest edited. And they talk about understanding variations between student and teacher application of rubrics. And they talk about those very things, that, you know, that there's a difference. And one of the things they found is that students often don't understand the rubric. So to me anyway, it's our job as teacher to make sure they do. Lee and Lindsay encourage the use of simpler language in rubrics. And they give an example of the word sophisticated. And they said that their students knew what sophisticated meant in general, but they didn't really know what sophisticated writing looked like. So if you're going to use something on your rubric that says uses sophisticated language, then you need to show them, not once, not twice, but probably a million times, exactly what that looks like. You know, so one of the things that came out of this study, it was a great study, you shall read it, is that abstract, ambiguous, or vague language on a rubric has no place, and that we have to really work hard to make sure that our students do, in fact, understand those words on the rubric. Go ahead. So Rebecca Lawrence does rater training once a month. Wow, that's amazing.
Wow.
That's a lot of work. Anybody else?
No,
okay, so go ahead.
I was going to say we're coming up with a different assessment for placement, and I have to come up with a writing test for that that can be done very quickly for us large numbers,
right,
40 students,
right,
and you know, kind of a quick 1, 2, 3, 4, and
right.
It's a bit daunting.
Yes.
I don't know just how detailed to get on it. Not very, I think, is the answer.
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that you have to do, I think, is, well, first of all, placement is daunting, right? Writing placement is daunting. So I don't know, I don't know if you know this, but I'm a big fan of directed self-placement. Every time I say that at TESOL, the room just explodes because teachers just can't imagine how second language writers are going to be able to do directed self-placement. But I maintain that if it's fashioned well and carefully articulated, you can use it. But you need to remember that there's a word in there, directed, which means that you're still in charge. There's a lot of good articles about the pros and cons of directed self-placement. You know, you might begin your reading with Royer and Giles had the seminal article in 1998 in 3 Cs. And then they have a 2003 edited collection. And then there are articles by Ann Geer at Michigan and Laura All, who I think is now at Wake Forest, in about directed self-placement. A lot of those articles are in the journal Assessing Writing. And then finally, I have a 2011 TQ article arguing for the use of directed self-placement with second language writers. I truly believe that it can work, and I do believe that it saves time and money, and then you don't have to fashion these tests and give them and then pay for raters to rate them and then worry about reliability and validity and all that. So that's my take on placement currently. What about y'all?
Deborah, doesn't that assume that the students want to do a careful and thoughtful assessment of their own work rather than finish the program quickly?
I don't know what you mean, Karen, by that.
Well, I have some students, and there are some students in our program who are very interested in getting into the right level, whose focus is that I want to get my English to be better so that I do well as I progress. And we have other students who approach it as, how fast can I finish with ESL so that we get on to the real stuff?
Yes, I get it. But if are you saying that they'll place themselves higher?
Yes.
To get over, to try to get.
Right. Yes.
Well, this is the thing, though. You control that because it's directed.
Well,
we
but
did
if
it by
we're
state.
testing 172 students per term.
Right. But don't you do diagnostic on the first day too?
Well, they place into different levels for different skills as well. But I mean, yeah, that's a good, I think that's a good question. The diagnostic on the first day would be.
Yeah. So that sometimes will help you, right? But if you do,
Then what do you do if you've got
just
like
don't
all these
say,
students who suddenly have to move levels? You've got to get add drop done, and you might end up with a class that doesn't have enough students and needs to be canceled depending on what the
Right.
outcome is.
Right. Yeah, I think that's the problem with all placement, quite frankly. But directed self-placement doesn't mean that a student just says, I want to be in 107 instead of 102. You know, they...
Oh, explain more about what directed means.
Okay, so you can do it either online or face-to-face, where you have some kind of meeting where you describe the kinds of writing classes that there are in your program and what each program demands of the student. In order to take class X, you must be able to do this, this, and this. And then they answer some kind of questionnaire, and there's lots of articles about designing that questionnaire, or you can steal it from Royer and Giles and use that and tailor it sort of maybe to second language writers and ask them to answer these questions. And then there's a sort of a formula. If you've answered yes to more than 10 questions, you really should be in this class. Now, in the end, can they choose the class? Yes, but then it's your job to say to them, if you choose this class, you may not have the skills that are necessary to do well. So it's not a process like I'm just going to pick my class and I'm going to go to it. So it has a lot. There's a lot more to do than that. And again, if you read Royer and Giles, you'll kind of see. And the Royer and Giles 1998 piece is in 3 C's, and it's very easy read because they're explaining step 1, step 2, step 3, and then you can see if that would work for your program.
Could you again put that citation
I
in
will.
the chat box?
As soon as I find it. Maybe Ryan will do it.
You'll give those to everyone, right?
Oh, certainly.
What was that one again?
It's Royer and Giles, 3 C's, 1998. And then Royer and Giles 2003 book. Yeah, those are good readings to get started because it can solve a lot of problems. I'm sure it'll create more, of course, right?
Well, and it's also that we place into grammar separately from reading, separately from composition, separately from listening, speaking.
Yeah, so it would be kind of a composition placement.
It would be
right.
complex we would have to devise a lot of different questionnaires for each, not a lot, but different ones for each.
Right. Another question that came up was someone was asking about emerging research trends in terms of assessment of pragmatic competence through writing tasks. And, you know, this is an iffy area. There's, I found an article called The Assessment Tool of L2 Learners' Pragmatic Competence, Written Discourse Completion Test. So it's called WDCT. And it's in this journal, I think it's International something of Economics and something else. That's the journal. But it's a woman at in the University of Queensland, and she said that there's a lack of valid tools to assess learners' interlanguage pragmatic competence. So teachers are hesitant about including that in classes, although there's research that supports the explicit teaching of pragmatic competence. So there, you know, it's something that, and this was in 2013, and they're still saying that it's a difficult area. There's a lack of valid tools to assess this. So I don't know, did any of you ask this question about pragmatic competence? Anybody?
Nothing.
Okay. Another question asked was overcoming the challenges of L2 writing assessment in an online class environment. And again, I think we can do the same things online that we do face-to-face. If you can have synchronous face-to-face meetings with students for conferences, can you do that? Skype or something like that. And then these 15-minute meetings or 10-minute meetings or 5-minute meetings, you will have instructions that you've given them to make sure that they're ready and able to talk about their writing and address issues they're having. Okay, so really, whether it's face-to-face or online, it's good assessment and good writing teaching are about the same, right? And it's a lot of work, and you still need to develop the scoring mechanism so you are accountable to your students. Anyone else have anything to say about online writing instruction and online writing assessment? Anybody? Okay, Ryan was able to find Ayers, Royer, and Giles' 1998 directed self-placement and attitude of orientation. And you can go from there with those. Another question that was asked before this webinar was about vocabulary and how we assess vocabulary in writing. So John Reed has a book, and it's called Assessing Vocabulary, oddly enough, in Cambridge 2000. And he talked about how assessing vocabulary is a very complex undertaking. And he said, along with that complexity, that, we used to use a discrete way of assessing vocabulary, and that's been met with a lot of criticism. For instance, being proficient isn't just knowing a lot of words, right? So he claims instead that vocabulary tests should be based on tasks that simulate communication activities and that the learners are likely to be engaged in outside of classrooms. So he says that maybe you should ask your learners to write a letter of complaint to a hotel manager. So that would be a certain vocabulary, a corpora vocabulary that they'd have to know. Or to show that they understand main ideas of a lecture. Or discuss in an interview how they hope to achieve career ambitions, all those things. And then he talked about Bachmann and Palmer in their book, which is rather old now, but still probably very useful. It's called Language Testing and Practice in 1996. They suggest using several analytic scales, which provide separate ratings for different components of language ability tested. And so in academic writing, Bachmann and Palmer developed 5 scales, one for syntax, one for vocabulary, one for rhetorical organization, one for cohesion, and one for register. So then vocabulary is being assessed, but instead of separately, it's part of the larger procedure for measuring students' writing ability. So it's all in there. So it can be an analytic rubric with 5 parts, right? If you look at the Holly Jacobs et al., you will see that there are different components that they think are important in writing. And only one of them is a language component. Very small piece of it is a language component. But an analytic rubric talks about all those kinds of things. Language, rhetorical organization, development, all those things. So, and it gives different weights to things. And if you develop your own analytic rubric, you can give the weight to things that you want to give to it. Okay, are there any other questions about anything? Placement?
I have a question. Does everyone, because I use guidelines rather than assigning like specific points for different items on a rubric, does everyone assign points for things, or do they use rubrics in a how do you implement your rubric? How do you use it to if it's summative, you know, how do you use it? How exactly do you use it to assign a grade? Is it just based on points for certain things?
Yes, but what you have points for is, that's up to you.
Right.
You were saying you can make it be analytic, you can devise it and weight it differently depending on what the goal is.
But it's always X number of points. It's never good, okay, needs improvement. It's always like points assigned.
It's points, and then I write those things. I have a section on my rubric where it says, you know, what were some positive things, what were some things that need work. And it's often one thing, one sentence that does both. But no, so I add that to it, but it does have points on it.
Mm-hmm.
And good can be 3 points, and needs improvement can be 1 point.
Yeah.
So however you want to do that math, right? And if you're using good and whatever the middle one was and needs improvement, that can be for a formative rubric, right?
Yeah.
Because you're not giving a grade on every draft,
No.
right? But you might give them sort of formative rubrics that let them know what they need to work on. Like,
I think maybe underlying is this concern about the numbers being too important. And I will say this, I write on there, although your grammar points, you know, brought you down a little bit, it's because you were being creative in the way that you wrote it. And so I balance that in other parts to show that, you know, it's not like you're writing simple sentences and having a lot of grammatical points. You're writing more complex things and struggling with ideas that are more abstract, and therefore you're going to take some hits here and there, but that's a good thing. So I mean,
and that's actually one of the things that I've struggled with in use of rubrics, is that sometimes I think what they're doing is not reflected by the points.
Right. So you have to balance that with something, but I think I tried to do that, because I have some very creative writers who will sometimes make more grammar mistakes than somebody else, but because they're doing other kinds of things. But it's balanced in the thing. But grammar does make a difference in comprehension, so that it is something to take into account. I wouldn't want to do away with that, but I always balance it, and I remark upon it as well. That's how I handle it.
and again, I don't think that rubrics are going to solve all our problems. However, I do think they make us, again, I'm going to say the accountable word, more accountable to our students, and I think that's a good thing. I forget who it was at the beginning who said that they were assessed on something that they either did it, and then the teacher changed his mind and gave her a poor grade anyway. And I always think about how I felt when I was a student and how my students feel when I give them very elaborate and very well thought out criteria and a rubric to match it. They know exactly what they have to do, and they know exactly how much it counts. And I think that's very important.
I think it's not only important, but I think it's important for them to realize that going forward they may not get that kind of feedback, and they're going to have to figure out that these are things that people do care about. I mean, I had a biology professor rant on about subject verb agreement and how students didn't show that in her biology paper, showed that they didn't really understand what they were talking about. And I would say it may not show up in their rubric or how they grade you, but it is there.
Right.
So I'm trying to show you these are things you need to care about,
Right.
whether you're told that or not in the future.
Right. Yes, you have to prepare them for the big bad world, and not everybody's going to be an ethical grader like you are, right? Someone else had a question about helping students go beyond the literal meaning of words. I found that different professors across the curriculum have different definitions and expectations for the word analyze. Well, they need to, I guess they need to ask the teacher. You give them your definition when you're working with them, but then also prepare them for the fact that they will have teachers who will not prepare them, which is sad, isn't it?
Does anyone have rubrics that assign bonus points? For example, like, you know, if I see that, sometimes I see that the points on the rubric, you know, and like are not going to add up, and then so maybe I could use bonus points and say your creativity or your way of doing this or your, you know,
if you write a rubric, you can put anything on your rubric you want, and you can make it weigh as much or as little as you want. You're in charge of that as the teacher. And I understand what you mean. Like you add up and it's like a 75, and that's a C, and you really thought your student
was a B.
Was a B paper or was a D paper, whichever. So then maybe you have to tweak your rubric.
Yeah.
Or assign an extra point for something else. But I don't do bonus points because I feel like I try to build into my rubric exactly what I want them to do, and I try to explain that to them.
Yeah. The word overall is a good fudge factor word. And they have to be explained that. What does that mean?
Yes, that is
well,
good.
This is the overall impression I had of it. This is how it came across as a whole thing. And that's nice to put in there. I've got a class, so I'm going to sign off. But this has been very informative. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks for all your questions.
Thank you for your answers.
Well, I hope they helped.
Yeah, they did. Thank you.
You're welcome. So Sylvia is saying we should wrap up the discussion at this point. For some reason, she doesn't have a microphone. But anyway, thank you so much. And it was a wonderful discussion, and I wish we could have a longer time, but we don't, unfortunately. So I thank you, and I appreciate your input. I'm going to put my email address so that you can email me, and I can give you more citations on things if you're interested. But I'm happy to address any and all questions via email.
Thank you, Deborah.
Thank you so much. Great questions. And I'm sorry for those of you whose mics didn't work. Take care.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you very much. And we will, the next discussion, we will send out information about that. Hopefully we're having another one soon. So thank you very much, Deborah.
Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Ryan. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.